Welcome to the P3 Show. My name is Ramya von Herman. I am the host of the P3 Show, which runs every month. And today is March, or we are in March 2026. The topic for this month is Department of Homeland Security, ICE, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, its role that it plays in the community, and the broader picture of what Department of Homeland Security plays in our city, state, and in our country. And as you're aware, a lot is happening with respect to ICE, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, and I know there are additional components within the Department of Homeland Security, such as TSA, and FEMA, and so on and so forth. But the topic today is public safety and a local impact, as well as human trafficking and child exploitation. These are some of the works that actually ICE does, as well as economic and infrastructure protection. So ICE isn't necessarily about, getting people off the streets with respect to people who are illegally here in the country, but more, they do additional work here in our community. And so this show isn't necessarily to just shed a light on the work that they do, but as you are all aware, the past 12 to 24 months, if not longer, there has been a lot of back and forth on about how people feel about the Department of Homeland Security, particularly ICE, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement here in Vermont, other parts of the country, namely Minneapolis area, California, and so there has been a really almost like a tug of war. Federal officers doing their work, community members not happy with the work they're doing. In part, they feel like people are being targeted and so on and so forth, and not necessarily, maybe sometimes not understanding as to the reason why these federal employees are doing their work. And in hindsight, could there have been a better way to do it? Possibly, yes. But would citizen, being able to understand the work they're doing and how difficult it is, could have helped? Yes, as well. But the reason why this show is here today, as far as this topic is concerned, is based on what happened very recently in South Burlington and some of the interactions that community members have had without, necessarily understanding the reason why they were there and what they were trying to do and what they were trying to accomplish after all said and done. Of course, our law enforcement, South Burlington law enforcement, as well as state responded to keep things calm. And as you all understand, and there are plenty of videos on YouTube that are available to see, but have a look at it, what we're talking about right now. It's really very, very impactful of what happened in South Burlington. Have a look, and we'll go after it.
You're a weekend. Fuck off, bitch. I can't believe you pay y'all.
this video and what it entails. And if you look at that specific video, you can tell that this is a public safety operations happening to keep the public safe. I know some people might not look at it that way, but you ask, what's the role of ICE in that video? What are they there to do? And you look at it. The first one would be they're there to remove individuals with serious criminal records, or they're not necessarily there to randomly remove people. So, and what would be the other way to do this situation where it doesn't get super chaotic? As you could see that video, it got chaotic. It got there's so much random things happening at the same time where, people's safety can be put in danger as you were looking through that video. And of course, one thing that would have been very, very important would be coordination with local law enforcement to deal with the targeted issues such as gang people who are here to traffic others, repeat offenders who have criminal records here. So looking at that specific videos, you can see the level of disconnect between the public and the federal officers who are there to do their job. And of course, the public officials sometimes don't make it necessarily easy for these issues to be addressed in a cohesive manner. And sometimes response to making sure that things are safe isn't necessarily the strongest, as it were, where you have, of course, there were the South Burlington Police Department, our local police department here in Burlington, Vermont. I believe the state also responded, but it was more to keep the protest, or as it was to a certain degree, a riot, because people were in the agents' faces, without not having to understand why they were there in the first place. So in such a really, really difficult case, it impacts everybody. It impacts federal officers who are there to do their job. And contrary to belief, people think that, ICE are there to arrest innocent people. And that couldn't be far from the truth. And I could see why some people may have a negative impact off them, or at least feel like they're there for the wrong reason. I can tell you from my experience as being a first-generation migrant who arrived at the country and went through the whole process, I appreciate the difficult work that federal officers have to do. It's definitely not pretty. It's not easy having to go and pick up somebody who is a troublemaker. From time to time, as it shouldn't happen, but do good people end up getting caught up in the situation? Absolutely, yes. But this is where conversation comes in, where local law enforcement, local leaders, local decision makers, and the federal partners have a prior conversation, better arrangement, better partnership to address these issues. This way, when they're here to apprehend somebody who's here for the wrong reasons or commits multiple crimes, and they're here as a guest, be it on a visa or on a green card, or as a student, whatever that might be at the time, that they understand that it's a privilege to be here and causing a lot of trouble. Certainly, the host, in this case here, citizens of this country, may not necessarily appreciate people committing crimes. That's not to say that people who are born here don't commit crimes. They certainly do. But one has to realize that when you are not yet a citizen, you are still a guest. And that it is important for local residents who are born and raised here to understand that, allowing people to do whatever they feel like doing and then vilifying, members of the federal service, including Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and its entities, and so on and so forth, that they're the villains. They're not the villains, so to speak. In my view, and based on somebody who has been through the process, it could very well be different for somebody else. But what happened a couple of weeks ago, based on the video that you saw, is really regrettable. And I think that we could have done a lot better. And we went through, spoke briefly on public safety. The main component of immigrations, customs, and enforcement is public safety. Their job is to make sure that people who show up here in the country, regardless of what their intentions are, here for the right reason. And if you are a guest here and you're not here for the right reason, they will come and collect you. But this is where removal of individuals becomes a very tricky thing, especially if it's not done in partnership with local communities, local leadership, local people who are on the ground, who have much more connection to the community. And so coordination is incredibly important. And of course, having support from the neighbors, businesses, and public spaces is incredibly important. And what else do DHS, Department of Homeland Security, and ICE do is prevent human trafficking, child exploitation, online predators. Of course, collaboration. They do collaborate with local police, NGOs, and additional federal partners that are situated here in our city. And of course, there's a lot of positive impact that they do have beyond the negative things that are being seen on television. ICE, of course, helps fight identity and financial fraud and illegal labor exploitation, and of course, intellectual property theft. So there's a lot of great stuff that they do that it's so sad that people don't realize. And the focus so much is who is in federal government, who is the president. So the actions that are happening against the federal officers is vis-a-vis who is in charge of the federal government. And they're treating them as a villain based on that. Not so much of, I'm not saying they don't care about the individual being removed, but it's not so much of 100% about that individual, more like, hey, this is our president, he's here to throw people out without due course. Of course, you're in a country here, we have due course laws where people are given the chance to be in front of their peers and so on and so forth. So we're gonna look at another video from the incident again to kind of just drive the point home that no agency is perfect and that understanding the full scope and the mission matters. When you look beyond the headlines, and this is incredibly important, you see broader efforts that are tied to safety, protection, and coordination across all levels of government. But when you look at this next video, you would see that that exists, provided that both local communities, stakeholders, NGOs, neighbors, local government participate in the process of keeping our country safe. Have a look at this video, and you would see how that was not put into practice, in part a very, I would even say, very stubborn local leaders, not just our city per se, but rather just our state. Have a look at the video. Now you can see the disconnect that if somebody was breaking into your house and a police officer responded, would your neighbor stop the police officer from conducting their lawfully sworn-in duties to protect your neighbor? Absolutely not. In this case, you see people who unfortunately are not necessarily informed of the purpose of having these federal officers who, I know the Department of Immigration and Customs and Enforcement are technically paid until next 4 years. So, but in terms of the portion that is not funded, are the TSA, the Transportation Administration. But look at this, you could see the flashbangs going on and all that kind of stuff and the disturbance that are being done. And this is basically a riot if you think about it, because these folks are standing in the way of a lawful activity that is happening, and they may not like what the work that the members of law enforcement are doing. However, this is when basic protocol breaks down, when people don't understand the meaning of protecting citizenry. That being said, I wish local and state elected leaders could speak directly to the public in addressing these issues with the public and partnering in a better way with our federal government. So issues like this could be avoided because this is a public safety issue. This is definitely a public safety issue as you've seen it, and it's unfortunate because people got hurt, members of our law enforcement got hurt as a result of this issue. Not the issue per se, but the way people were responding to the issue. And so having a better education and understanding why these guys are there is incredibly important. Also, it doesn't help when local community members, neighborhood folks go there and start disrupting the process forcefully, so to speak. And of course, that creates an unsafe situation for them, for law enforcement members, for federal partners, and then it puts public leaders in almost like a defensive mode where, people start pointing fingers at each other. And they start putting stuff on Facebook, on X.com, and all the other stuff that are out there to make their quote-unquote official points. The point I'm trying to make at the end of the day is that I did invite, I sent an invitation to DHS, and I know they haven't responded, which I can totally understand in part because, this is a very sensitive subject, and I know people look at it as a bad people, but in part they're fellow community members. These are our neighbors. These are people who probably living next to you, who are, who took the oath to protect and serve. And it is unfortunate that people are looking at a different way due to politics. And of course, security isn't just about who comes to power. It's about protecting the system that keeps you safe, that keeps your neighbors safe, that keep our schools safe, that keep our city, state, country safe. And if we don't realize that, we are really, really in a very, very difficult position. And we cannot afford that. And just going into in the next 5 or so minutes, I want to look at we talked a lot about the safety component of it, but there's also an economic impact on having ICE in our community. And as you well know, beyond what you see the headlines and in this couple of videos that clips rather that you watched, they really do a lot of work pertaining to, as I said earlier, preventing identity thefts and document fraud, illegal child labor exploitation, intellectual property theft that are happening while we're not, looking. And so without them in our community doing their work, you wouldn't even notice how things are terrible. And these guys are doing this work behind the scenes, actually enforcing, customs with respect to picking up people who are here illegally, but also committing crimes at the same time. That is just one component. This is what's getting much of the noise. But they do a lot of work behind the scenes that we don't often get to see in front of the news. And of course, as the saying goes, that bad news never makes into TV. Rather, good news does not make into TV, bad news does. And so when you see all this commotion happening, this will get all the headlines. But what's not going to get the headlines a lot is how they address financial identity frauds, child labor exploitation, intellectual property theft, and so on. So, and within that component, if you look at it, there are a lot of cases that are out there that they're working on it, but I wish people could step out of their shoes and put themselves in a federal employee's shoes. And if you look at it, they're very lucky to be financed for the next 4 years because this could have not happened a year ago or so when this was before Congress. So now that they've been funded, they have all the ability to get their work done, provided that the political shenanigans stays away. So the point I'm trying to make in this show is that and I would have loved to have somebody from local DHS office here to make their case for themselves, is that it's just people look at things at the wrong end of the stick all the time. And it's unfortunate that that is the case. And they do much more in a local community. And one of the biggest components, of course, is public safety and their partnership with our law enforcement, local law enforcement, and state law enforcement. But what am I trying to say here is that the videos that you've seen is that I am hoping that as time goes on, that our leadership will take a moment to create a public forums where they invite federal agency members and the public to have a dialogue on how better to address these issues. I know it'll take a lot to do this because it takes two to tango, but this will help in the long term. But you can't get something done if we stay silent and let what you see right now that was happening in South Burlington a few weeks ago to keep continuing. We cannot have that happen. And now ICE is synonymous with a bad issue, and it's not the case. Their job is to enforce customs and immigration. And of course, just like in any sovereignty, that is a component of being a sovereign. And of course, people will move around the world, go to different places. Some people would unfortunately try their best to go into a sovereign territory and, getting here illegally. But you have to realize that you live in a sovereign territory, and you must be willing to work with local, state and federal programs that would get you to the right path. What you see on the screen will not get somebody a citizenship, period. It would actually create the opposite effect. People think that by doing what they're doing would be helping immigrants, people who are here illegally. That does not help anybody. It just amplifies a very difficult relationship between the community and federal partners. And so people showing up on the streets and thinking that the ICE is there to arrest somebody in the house. From what I understand, whoever that was in the house was no longer there. But at the same time, by crawling around the house and as you can see right there, trying to do a tug of war with officers just doing their job, that's the definition of being not a good citizen, unfortunately. And so what they're doing right there, if you look at the video, that's not being helpful. Let the guys do their job. It's actually much more safer when difficult people who are not there to assimilate or not there to do their job, that the members of our federal law enforcement, get taken care of, and they take over that situation. And hopefully that our local and state partners, law enforcement partners, rather, why am I saying partners? Because I'm not working for the federal government. But the point I'm trying to make here is that an opportunity has been missed here. And as you can see, federal officers are standing guard and trying to make sure that the situation does not escalate, but that they at least get access to what the reason why they came in for in the first place. And by the way, when I went there, I wasn't exactly within this spot per se. When I left work, I ended up trying to make a left on Dorset, and I noticed that the entire road was closed. And I was wondering, I was like, whatever that is happening must be very serious, because this is Vermont. The roads don't get closed much. And so, sure enough, and you check the news, and of course, it's something similar to what's happening there. And of course, something like that would lead up to roads closing down and whatnot. But that being said, something like this, which Vermont shouldn't be known for this, period. It's unfortunate that it happened in Minneapolis, but the state of Vermont shouldn't be known for this. We use the word progressive a lot here in this state, and there's nothing progressive about harassing, throwing stuff at federal officers and wrestling with them and standing in their way. That does not solve public safety. It does not solve the progressive community spirit that this state needs. I think that it's the opposite. These men are there to do their job, and I think we have failed as Vermonters. And I hope that in the near future, if they're there to do their job, that we don't stand in the way, and that state elected officials, set an example to how it needs to be conducted better, communicate better with local neighbors and wards and such about how to better conduct yourself when law enforcement are doing their job and our federal partners are doing their job. Having a tug of war doesn't help you, doesn't help me, doesn't help anybody, period. And so why do it? Why create an unsafe situation? Why create multiple blocks, get blocked, people coming from their homes, people trying to go to work, people trying to just go about their lives, people probably going to hospital, to weddings or whatever it is out there. People's lives are put on hold. In part, some of our few neighbors think that they know better. And, this isn't to, how should I say, put anybody on the spotlight, but rather say as a community, we need to better understand the role Department of Homeland Security services play in our city, in our state, in our wards, in our neighbors, in our community. And when you stand there, when people stand in front of them and they try to wrestle with them, you're wrestling with your neighbor who's trying to protect you. And that's unacceptable. That's not okay to do that, to wrestle with them. Let them do their job. And if you felt that they were doing something wrong, that's why we have courts. That's, of course, you have the right to redress the government of the day. You have the right to protest peacefully. The key word is peacefully. Blocking an intersection is not peaceful. Blocking and wrestling with members of law enforcement, there's nothing peaceful about that. Standing in front of a house, refusing to let law enforcement enter the house, which one is not even your house, that is not peaceful. Doing what folks are doing that you see in this clip, if they're standing right there where they're at right now, and provided that they're not in the middle of the street, that they're standing, they can sing, that's, there's nothing wrong with that. They can express themselves peacefully, there's nothing wrong with that. But the moment stuff like this happens, that you see people getting in the way of members of law enforcement leaving the house and trying to wrestle with them, that is when it becomes unacceptable. So, long story short, the point of this conversation today is the role that, and I said this I think multiple times within this show, is the role that Department of Homeland Security, their component ICE, Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, plays in our community. It's incredibly important, and I'm saying this as a first-generation migrant. I'll repeat this again as much as I can. I'm saying this as somebody who's gone through the experience of what it's like to attain citizenship in this country. It was not easy, it was very long, but it was worth it, every moment of it. But why was it worth it? It's because I never, in any way or shape, stood in the way of people doing their work, people doing what they're here came to do in the first place, and also respecting local laws, assimilating into local life, and learning the language, the culture, the know-how, how this beautiful experience, the Republic, as President Lincoln put it once, when he was asked during the Constitutional Convention, somebody asked him, what is this government? And he said, and I think the person at the time were thinking that this is a kingdom, but the president said, this is a republic if you can keep it. And this is incredibly important, and it's unfortunate that sometimes people don't understand. We're only as safe as the next person if we can keep it. When organizations like ICE try to do their job, and we stand in the way, we go the opposite direction of what's like to have a republic. And so, number one, understanding the component of why ICE is part of the community, the work that they do, from safety to economic impact to the overall picture that they do here in the city and state and the country, is incredibly important, and understanding it as well. And this point is from my point of view, but I'm sure everybody has their own point of view. But I would like to end on this, and you've seen all the clips of what's happened here in Vermont, and I'm hoping that this is not repeated again, is that, and I'll repeat this same sentence that I said earlier again, no agency is perfect, be it Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, any local police department, any public leader, even you citizens. Nobody's perfect. No agency is perfect. But understanding the full scope of the mission, why they're there, why they were created, what the purpose is. And I know some people think that they're not doing what they were created for. In truth, they are. It's incredibly important. And when you look at beyond the headlines, you see broader effort that is tied to safety, protection, coordination of across all levels of government, even though sometimes the collaboration here isn't necessarily the greatest in our state, between federal and local partners sometimes. And it's really, really important that we understand that before before people go to the streets and start wrestling and rattling around. And I hope you took a lot from that video. And it's not anything we're proud of. I think it's unfortunate that it happened. People have the right to assemble. They have the right to redress the government of the day. That's a part of the experience of the Republic. That's part of being living in a free world. And of course, you're free to say what you want to say because you're afforded under the Constitution. But at the same time, having to assault somebody, that is not protected activity. Having to stand in the way of law enforcement doing their job and harassing them and throwing stuff at them, that's not a protected activity. It's the opposite of protected activity. And so as a fellow Vermonter, somebody who lives here in Burlington, somebody who works in the public sphere, I ask of you, fellow Vermonters, to be more collaborative and help your federal partners and employees and residents and so on and so forth. By the way, TSA, Department of the Transportation Administration, they're not getting paid. I don't see anybody out there on the streets protesting that they're not getting paid, but I see people protesting that Immigration Customs are doing their job. And by the way, ICE is already covered. They're paid for the next 4 years plus. But TSA is not. They're part of component of DHS. That is something I'm yet to see anybody out there doing outpouring support for them. And I do understand at local airports and nationally, people are donating food and everything to support local government, rather TSA staff members who are part of the federal government. That's great. But it takes two to tango. If people are not on the streets speaking out loud, saying we need to support our neighbors who work at the airport, our neighbors who work for law enforcement, we're not really doing anything. We're just there to complain every time. And complaining does not work. Sometimes we've got to put the sleeve up, and ready to go, help people. It's okay to support your neighbor whom you think is being treated unjustly. But you have to understand the context of why that is happening. Of course, when you see somebody being mistreated, it's important to step in, of course. But law enforcement doing their job and equating that to unjust conduct is not necessarily the best way to go. If you, of course, see an unjust activity happening, of course, speak up. But there are better ways to conduct yourself in being there, following basic laws, following basic rules. You have the right to protest, and I'll say that again and again for somebody who worked hard to attain his citizenship. You have the right to protest. You have the right to redress the government of the day. But that does not give you, based on what you've seen on the video, that is not a ticket to harass people, whether they're in federal service or local service. And I would like to ask public elected officials, people who are appointed in positions, to do their part to facilitate conversation between neighbors and folks who work in the federal government, so they can understand what they're there for, what they're there to do, and not just wait until the headlines come out and then go in front of the podium and say something. create a better conversation beyond emails, headlines, it will be better for everybody. Thank you, and I hope that we come together as a country, as citizens, as neighbors, as immigrants, because everybody's from somewhere, you know, whether you're native or not here or born here, everybody's from somewhere. That we can come together, put our differences aside, put tribalism aside, understand the context of why things are happening, help each other out, but don't do it destructively. Do it with a thought process and have that conversation with your fellow beings, and hopefully let's be better at it. You know, and I'll end on this. We can only have what we have if we can keep it and do it peacefully, respectfully, collaboratively, not throw stuff at each other, not wrestle at each other to the ground. That's not going to help anybody. So thank you.